every soul is created by God and with a purpose. If you're someone who's hurting right now, please reach out. You are not alone. You are seen, and you are loved, and you are worth it. And I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2025, the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Ramirez, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent for all members to have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the subject of my special order hour.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a Chicagoan, I know firsthand the terror that Trump's mass deportation agenda and Department of Homeland Security's immigration raids are having on our communities. You see, my constituents, they've been surveilled, they've been threatened, they've been tear gassed, they've been hit with pepper balls, they've been shot, they've been subjected to warrantless arrest, rammed with Department of Homeland Security vehicles, kidnapped and disappeared. And people keep asking us why DHS agents are allowed to behave this way. Why isn't Congress doing something about it? Well, let me start by saying DHS was intentionally established with an overbroad mission, and some would argue unchecked power. Yet Republicans have expanded that power with a blank check and unlimited personnel. And Trump, with his authoritarian tendencies, his power grabs, his overreach, and his willingness to shamelessly use DHS as his own force of terror, is only making visible what so many communities have already known to be true: that terrorizing is the point, violating our rights is the point, that fear is the point. You see, creating a public enemy is meant to convince Americans to sacrifice our freedoms for the promise of security. But let me be very clear. Nothing that the Department of Homeland Security is doing is making us any safer. In this moment, under Secretary Noem, under Donald Trump, DHS has become the single greatest threat to public safety. You see, DHS agents are using chemical weapons on protesters and bystanders at least 49 times across 18 incidents in Chicago and suburbs since October 1st. Bovino and CBP agents are violating court injunctions and agency rules. They're lying in court about incidents where civilians have been put in danger. The government alleged that Marimar Martinez used her car to assault and impede federal law enforcement. But then, federal prosecutors filed a motion to dismiss their own case. Why? Because while she didn't assault the agents, they did shoot her 5 times, and then they went on and they bragged about it. You see, President Trump and DHS are lying. They're acting with impunity. They're rejecting checks and balances. They're ignoring Congress and the courts. And here's my question to this House. If DHS cannot be held accountable, if we are obstructed from conducting oversight, if they are systematically undermining our civil rights and perpetrating violence in our communities, what in fact is Congress' responsibility? You see, the answer is clear. We must strip away every tool that they're using to terrorize us, starting with the taxpayer dollars that they're using to harm Americans. And so today, in our special order hour, I'm going to be yielding to my colleagues who will highlight stories of victims of Trump's enforcement overreach, discuss our ongoing work to hold the administration accountable, and uplift how we are pushing back against the abuses of this president, of Secretary Noem, and the entire administration. With that, Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield 5 minutes to the gentle lady from Washington State, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal.
Thank you so much, Representative Ramirez, for your incredible leadership on this issue and so many others. Thank you to the Congressional Progressive Caucus for the Special Order Hour and to the Hispanic Caucus for all the work that has been happening at this very, very serious moment in time. I stand here as the top Democrat on the Immigration Subcommittee on the Judiciary Committee. And I have been conducting shadow hearings both here in DC and across the country. In October, we had a shadow hearing in Chicago, Illinois, in your home state, and I really appreciate all the work you did to help us facilitate that. We had 18 members of Congress from all over the country come to that shadow hearing, and it was the largest act of congressional immigration oversight since Donald Trump took office. What we heard was alarming, and I have worked in this space for a very long time. Border Patrol Commander Gregory Bovino and his rogue immigration agents are terrorizing everyone, regardless of immigration status. We heard from an active duty service member, someone who has put his life on the line for this country, heartbroken because he had to fly back to this country because his father had been deported, was gone before he even got back from his deployment. And he said, I have put my life on the line for this country, and my father, who has done nothing wrong, was deported. It was outrageous. On Halloween weekend alone, Bovino deployed tear gas in a residential neighborhood as children were gathering for a Halloween parade. Border Patrol agents dragged a 67-year-old U.S. citizen from his car, breaking 6 of his ribs, while children in Halloween costumes watched in horror. And what was his crime? Turning down a street to get home. That's what he did. Bovino then went south to Charlotte, North Carolina, to continue his reign of terror. Masked agents raided a church. Charlotte Mecklenburg school records showed that over 27,000 students were absent the first school day following Border Patrol's arrival in the city. One U.S. citizen reported Border Patrol tried to arrest him twice within 5 minutes. And in my home state of Washington, we've seen green card holders taken, people who have lived in the United States for decades with deep roots in our communities, and U.S. citizen family members. In Issaquah, Washington, agents kidnapped a mother outside her child's preschool and quickly deported her. This is not unique. Since Trump rescinded the practice of avoiding enforcement actions at sensitive locations, we've seen a daycare worker snatched in front of children in Chicago, a father arrested outside his child's preschool in Oregon, and let's not forget that many care workers are immigrants. Among early educators, 26%, close to 500,000 people are immigrants. Many are being forced out of their jobs, whether it's through Trump's mass forced layoffs when he's abruptly canceled entire categories of legal statuses, or workers forced to step back from care work after a loved one's detention and deportation. Trump's assault on our communities is not possible without the U.S. immigration incarceration system. Since Donald Trump took office, people in detention have skyrocketed to unprecedented levels, with over 66,000 people incarcerated in immigration facilities. ICE plans to increase its capacity to detain to an average of 107,000 people by the end of the year, using $45 billion that was in the Republicans' big bad betrayal bill. How did Republicans finance this unprecedented spending? By stealing health care from 16 million Americans. This is cruel and unnecessary. First, let's be clear that immigration is a civil matter, not a criminal matter. People are held pending immigration proceedings, and ICE itself has said that detention is not supposed to be punitive. ICE's own numbers show that 73% of those who have been detained have no criminal record, and the vast majority of the remaining 27% have minor convictions like traffic violations. People are detained in horrific conditions. Facilities are overcrowded. People are sleeping on the ground next to toilets. Folks are denied medical care. If the private prison companies running the facilities provide any protein in meals, it's often undercooked and, yeah, sometimes bloody. Dinner is often served after midnight. So it's no surprise that these conditions are so poor, because about 90% of people who are imprisoned in for-profit facilities, which have a record of cutting corners on essential services to reap profits. And Trump has decimated oversight, including by illegally blocking members of Congress from doing unannounced inspections. And that is why today, with you, Representative Ramirez, and 124 members, colleagues, as original co-sponsors, we introduced My Dignity for Detained Immigrants Act, transformative legislation to completely overhaul the system. What's happening is not normal. We can't allow it to continue. I yield back to Ms. Ramirez, and I thank you again for your leadership.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And thank you for your leadership. I'd like to now yield to the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Congressman Adriano Espaillat, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Congresswoman Ramirez, for your leadership in this special hour. And thank you to the Congressional Progressive Caucus, as well as the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and all the other members associated with this special hour. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to forcefully speak against the Trump administration horrific ICE abuses, far beyond an overreach on the immigrant and Latino communities across the country. Back in New York City, my community is being assaulted, and we are hearing of the fear every single day. Fear has a way of settling into communities and making sure they don't move forward. So we must break with the fear. Just recently, a video surfaced from 26 Federal Plaza in New York City that showed a distraught woman violently shoved to the ground, thrown to the ground, slammed through the ground by an ICE officer as her young daughter tried to assist her. The woman was unarmed, nonviolent, and posed absolutely no threat to anyone. According to a recent investigation, more than 170 U.S. citizens have been detained by immigration agents in recent months. U.S. citizens, people that often are telling these officers that they are a U.S. citizen and are disregarded and pushed aside, handcuffed, detained for hours. Many reportedly have been kicked, dragged, and detained for days. As of November 2025, ICE has detained 65,135 people, and roughly 73.6% of them have no criminal conviction. Many in immigrant and Latino communities, including U.S.-born individuals, now report fear, reluctance to go to court, to public services, or even to participate in regular civic life. The violent incident in 26 Federal Plaza is not an isolated lapse. It reflects a much broader policy of aggressiveness, unaccountable enforcement, with little transparency and no due process. We must demand accountability, transparency, and protection of civil rights to ensure enforcement respects due process and human dignity. The American people are seeing the reality of this enforcement, fear, brutality, and injustice. They will not stand for it. Congresswoman Ramirez, I will echo again what I said in Chicago during the hearing that we had there. Masked agents, without a first name and a last name, without a shield number, anonymous masked ICE agents patrolling our street, pushing people up against the wall, slamming to the ground a sitting U.S. senator for the state of California, Senator Padilla, slamming a woman to the ground at 26 Federal Plaza in front of her young girl, not representing or respecting sensitive locations like places of worship, houses of worship. This is the state of America today. This is the Trump dictatorship. It's not tomorrow. It's not next week, next month, or next year. It is happening right now. These are the characteristics of a dictatorship. And we must do everything we can to save our nation. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman. And I want to thank you for your constant leadership on this issue. Really appreciate it. I want to now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Garcia.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to oppose the Trump administration's outrageous overreach on immigration that's tearing families apart in my district and around the country. Since taking office, Trump has declared war on our communities. Masked ICE and CBP thugs, and I call them thugs because they don't identify themselves, and in our state, police officers, law enforcement always identifies themselves. They've detained parents on their way to work. They've kidnapped U.S. citizens. They've tear gassed people, including children. They've deployed the National Guard to our cities and terrorized hardworking immigrants who are following the rules, all without warning, charges, or due process. This administration is abusing its power to trample on the Constitution and our civil rights. Federal agents have shot 2 of my constituents, one fatally. In the other, where they brought about charges, the case fell apart, the charges were dropped. That case was alluded to earlier in this presentation. When agents show up in schools, hospitals, or factories without clear authority or regard for court orders, they send a message to everyone that their rights are conditional. When agents run into a daycare center and drag out a teacher in front of the children and parents, they're not following the law. They're using Gestapo tactics. And none of this is about public safety. More than 4,000 people have been arrested by federal agents in Chicago, but only about 3% have any type of criminal records. When the government goes after the people just because of the color of their skin or the jobs that they hold, they're not going after criminals. They're clearly using racial profiling to meet the arbitrary detention quotas they have been given. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus and the Congressional Progressive Caucus are standing up for the people. We're calling for transparency, tracking every incident, and working on laws to curb unchecked power and to restore our constitutional rights. In the 4th District and across the country, every family deserves to feel safe and respected, knowing that their government is there to protect their rights and uphold the law. We intend to hold this administration accountable when they don't, every single time. I yield back to Representative Ramirez.
Thank you, Congressman. And now I'd like to yield to the gentleman from the great state of California, Mr. Carvajal.
Thank you, Representative Ramirez. Mr. Speaker, I represent California's Central Coast, where close to half of our residents are Latino, and where farm workers are essential pillars of our community. Since Trump's return to the White House, our community has experienced an unprecedented level of chaos, fear from ICE raids, and family separations. I witnessed one of these raids myself in Carpinteria, California, where ICE agents unleashed a disproportionate show of force. What I saw was completely unacceptable. Masked ICE agents in military gear firing tear gas and other projectiles into the crowd of peaceful civilians and reporters. Even a child was injured by shrapnel. Upon seeing these violent tactics, I demanded to speak to the person in charge, but I was denied. As the elected representative of the Central Coast, I have a duty to respond to my constituents and demand accountability for ICE actions that day. And sadly, this has not been an isolated incident. Throughout the year, ICE has carried out aggressive indiscriminate, and often unjustified operations across our country, actions that erode our freedom and undermine our civil rights and public trust in government. ICE claims they need to be aggressive to keep us safe. But how does harassing law-abiding farm workers, families, and children make anyone safer? While I agree our immigration system is broken, cruelty is not the solution. Harassment is not reform. We must continue to shine a light on the Trump administration's abuses. We must enact legislation that holds ICE accountable and builds a fair immigration system. Because at the end of the day, this is about who we are as a nation. True reform is possible, and I will keep fighting to make it happen. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman. And we have a number of colleagues that are wanting to speak today, so I'm going to try to implore the 3-minute rule here. I would like to now yield to the gentle lady from Oregon, Congresswoman Salinas, for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to call out the inhumane treatment of immigrants and people living on American soil. Individuals are missing from work, children are skipping school, and people are too afraid to leave their own homes because Trump has ordered his administration to arrest immigrants at any cost. This manufactured chaos has resulted in ICE vigilantes arresting U.S. citizens and even children. My own constituents have had to endure this horrific trauma across Oregon's Willamette Valley. Last week, I visited the Tacoma, Washington ICE detention facility to visit constituents and to conduct oversight. I wanted the opportunity to see for myself the facility, to understand what my constituents are being put through. I gave ICE their 7-day notice of my arrival as they had requested, but I knew I would get a sanitized version of the privatized prison I would be shown. But the alternative would be to drive 3 hours, and then they would turn me away. The goal was to meet with my constituents and their attorney and get a tour of the facility. When I asked about the detainees not being able to access medication, facility officials told me that the detainees often lie about the lack of access to medical care. They claimed anyone could get access to medical care that they need. However, I know of at least one of my constituents who was detained and was not able to access their heart medication he needed. He went 2 weeks without his life-saving heart medicine. Why would anybody lie about that? Their heart medicine. He had no reason to lie, but he did get it 2 weeks later when he was sent down to Texas. When I asked about the tuberculosis outbreak in the Alaska detention facility, ICE claimed the news reports got it wrong. I questioned if similar outbreaks happened in the Tacoma ICE facility, and again, flat out lies. The attorney I spoke to afterwards told me, yes, there were outbreaks in the Tacoma facility. When I asked about detainees not being able to access their attorneys, facility officials told me, oh, there are tablets that they can access, there are lots of rooms. And when I was supposed to meet with my constituents on that same day, I was refused access to my own constituents and their attorney. So even with the full 7-day notice, the Tacoma ICE detention facility, the Department of Homeland Security, the GEO group, they couldn't get their story straight. They raised more questions than they could answer. The questions they did answer were lies, half-truths, and misleading at best. We should all be holding ICE, Homeland Security, and this administration accountable. It may start at our local or regional detention facilities, but it does not stop there. We must hold Tom Homan, Kristi Noem, and Donald Trump accountable. They must tell me why a 17-year-old U.S. citizen was arrested, traumatized, and suffered shards of glass in his eye when an ICE vigilante smashed in his driver's side window and arrested him, detained him first, and asked questions later. This is not justice. This is terror. But I have a voice. I have a voice for the people in my district. I have a voice for those who still believe in the United States is the land of opportunity, just as the Salinas family did in 1945. I will continue to conduct oversight and publicize the horrific acts of ICE. They cannot continue to operate in the shadows. We must all continue to speak out and hold those who have raised their hands and pledged their oath to the Constitution. We must hold them accountable, but they are failing miserably today. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you for your leadership. I want to now yield to the gentle lady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you to the gentlelady for yielding, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. My community of Charlotte was under siege by the Department of Homeland Security's campaign of terror last month. They call it Operation Charlotte's Web. Border Patrol agents engaged in extreme racial profiling, excessive force, and brutal tactics, spreading fear in our community. Fear that shattered the car window of a U.S. citizen born in Honduras, throwing him in the glass-covered ground in handcuffs after he already identified himself to agents. Fear when more than 30,000 Charlotte-Mecklenburg students, 21% of the student body, were absent from school the Monday after the raids began because parents were terrified that their children would be victims of CBP's brutality. Fear as businesses shuttered their doors to try and protect their customers and employees from being wrongfully targeted by these federal agents. Cruelty was the point of their operation, but Charlotte never caved in to their cruelty. Citizens instead packed churches for training to empower themselves to respond to Border Patrol agents. Parents band together to safely get their children to school, and business owners patrolled the streets to protect their neighbors, their customers, and their employers. CBP's actions in Charlotte were deplorable and absolutely unacceptable. I've already reached out to DHS, demanded transparency on exactly what Border Patrol was doing in Charlotte. I'm still waiting for answers to my questions. But make no mistake about it. My constituents want answers. I do too. They deserve the answers, and I'm going to keep fighting for them. Congress must end these unlawful, un-American, and unnecessary raids on our communities. I yield back.
I agree with you, Congresswoman. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. McGarvey.
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez. Mr. Speaker, this isn't an abstract issue. I'm hearing every single day from constituents who are too afraid to go to the grocery store, to go to school, to go to church, to go to work. I'm hearing from nonprofits that are already stretched too thin, feeding our hungry neighbors, facing even more demand now that Trump is targeting food assistance and breadwinners are being snatched off the street. This is the impact of the Trump administration's cruelty. A year-long tirade against immigrants in this country that has blown way past just targeting violent criminals. At home in Louisville, we don't have the national troops in our backyard or ICE performing public raids, but it's the quiet, steady increase in arrests and profiling and detentions that has been devastating to our community. So many Louisvillians, regardless of status, are afraid of being profiled, attacked, or violently detained just because of how they look. Masked agents are targeting parents in the pickup lines of their school. They're dragging mothers out of their cars. They're smashing windows to arrest old men, separating families in the middle of the night, zip-tying children. They're using immigration hearings and check-ins as setups and defying court orders. And then our neighbors are being shipped off to countries where they've never even been or held in detention centers with unspeakably inhumane conditions, with no due process, with no access to attorneys, no path forward. This is not immigration policy. This is cruelty for the sake of cruelty, political theater with real-life consequences. Indiscriminate arrests do not make anyone safer. Masked agents with assault rifles and zero accountability don't give anyone peace of mind. This cruelty doesn't serve anyone. And this isn't just happening on cities you see in your TV screens. As we've heard tonight, this is happening everywhere. So to my colleagues across the aisle whose districts run on the backs of immigrant labor, whose neighbors are just as scared as mine, who are noticeably silent on this issue, where are you? Why aren't you protecting your constituents? Why aren't you fighting for the people you represent? Because what you allow your government to do to someone else, they will one day do to you. Speak up. I yield back.
Congressman, I'd like to now yield 2.5 minutes to the gentle lady from Oregon, Ms. Dexter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague, Representative Ramirez, for her incredible leadership holding us together today. I rise today to make one thing clear. Trump's cruel immigration agenda is not about public safety. It is about intimidation and cruelty. And the people of Oregon are living with the consequences of that every single day. A man recovering from surgery was violently pulled from his car, left in excruciating pain. A pregnant mother was taken and separated from her 2-year-old child, denied comprehensive prenatal care while in custody. And another mother in my district, along with her 4 U.S. citizen children, were detained for weeks without access to counsel. They are parents doing school drop-off, workers heading to their jobs, longtime neighbors who strengthen our communities. Trump promises safety, but he delivers chaos. Cruelty is not law enforcement, it is intimidation. And the harm goes beyond our immigrant families. In Portland, an elementary school had to relocate students because chemical agents deployed by federal immigration officials drifted onto their campus. Low-income seniors were told to shut off their air conditioning in the middle of summer because those chemicals were entering the building's ventilation systems. And when Portlanders have peacefully stood against these abuses, they have been met with pepper balls, tear gas, and masked agents using violent force. Once again, there is nothing about this agenda in the pursuit of public safety. It is federal power turned against the people it is meant to serve. Congress must reject cruelty as a tool of policy and restore humanity, transparency, and accountability. That is why I introduced the Restoring Access to Detainees Act with Senator Murphy. Every family should know where their loved one is being held. Every detainee must have easy, free access to call legal counsel. I also authored the Clear ID Act with Representative Crockett to ensure our community members are not approached or detained by unidentified federal agents. Without identification, there is no accountability. That is how democracies erode, and we will not allow it. Trump wants America to believe his cruelty makes us safer. It does not. When communities live in fear, they cannot trust law enforcement. When families are torn apart, our nation grows weaker. Real safety comes from stability, trust, and community, not fear and force. Thank you.
Congresswoman. And now I would like to yield to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Rivas, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, to the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and Congresswoman Ramirez for organizing today's important conversation on the Trump administration's cruel and inhumane treatment of immigrant communities. This is an important discussion to have in front of the American people because, as they have seen, ICE is out of control. All summer, ICE has been terrorizing communities across Los Angeles, sowing fear in our families and rounding up our most vulnerable. I have been sharing the story of Benjamin Guerrero Cruz, a senior at Reseda High School, who was detained by ICE while walking his dog. He is an older brother, a loving son, and a valued member of the community. He's a high school student, just a kid. Benjamin should be in a classroom, not a courtroom. Benjamin was detained by ICE, separated from his family and friends. He was originally transferred from the Adelanto detention facility in California to a detention center in Arizona. Less than 24 hours later, he was on a plane ready to be sent to Louisiana, but instead he was sent back to California. This all occurred without his family even knowing. I keep sharing this story because the American people deserve to see how cruelly ICE is treating children, elderly, women, and others, even a U.S. senator. ICE is incapable of treating our most vulnerable with the respect that they deserve. If this was happening to Benjamin, imagine who else it's happening to. I have been urging ICE leadership to answer for their chaotic, inconsistent, and cruel decision-making processes that have torn apart families across the country. This is why I introduced the INFORM Act. My bill holds ICE accountable for the nightmare they are forcing families like Benjamin's to live through. Many immigrant families in my district do not know the whereabouts of their loved ones after they are detained by ICE. My bill respects the dignity of immigrant families and promotes government transparency. With my Hispanic Caucus and Progressive Caucus colleagues, I will continue showing up to detention facilities and working with my colleagues to hold ICE accountable, promote government transparency, and respect the dignity of immigrant families. Thank you, and I yield back to Congresswoman Ramirez.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And now I'd like to yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. Gomez, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Trump's unhinged immigration raid started in downtown Los Angeles, in my congressional district, not targeting criminal, quote-unquote, immigrants that he promised that he would go after, but targeting anybody that looked like me, looked like my colleagues, looked like my family members, looked like the people that live in Los Angeles. I don't know any MS-13 members, gang members, that work at a car wash or as day laborers. That's where he was targeting, not focused on people he said he was going to go after. And then we warned everybody in this country that this would continue, that they would go on to other cities using immigration as a pretext to try to intimidate blue cities and blue states and blue cities and red states, and that a violation of the rights of immigrants, the rights of people across the country is not going to be contained in LA, it's going to spread. So they went on to DC, Chicago, Portland, Charlotte, and New Orleans just of today. That's what they're going after. They want to intimidate people. They want to intimidate people that don't agree with them. And that was before Donald Trump and the Republican passed their one big, beautiful bill that included a $175 billion slush fund that would turn ICE and CBP into his own personal national police force, where he could send it wherever he wants, whenever he wants, without any accountability. That is dangerous. That is a threat to our republic. That's a threat to our states. That's a threat to our communities. And we need to stand up and put an end to it. And the way we do that is by taking that money away and reinvesting it into something the American people need. So I introduced a bill called the Make Housing Affordable, Defend Democracy Act that takes that $175 billion and tackles the housing affordability crisis in our country, investing that money to help start a 21st century housing boom that will build 1 million units of housing per year for the next 6 years, that helps renters with down payment, with assistance to get by, and then at the same time gives first-time home buyers money for a down payment. So if we want to tackle the affordability crisis that is at the top of the agenda for the American people, that's not a con job, then we need to pass the Make Housing Affordable and Defend Democracy Act, because it's about affordability, not authoritarianism. It's about American values and not Donald Trump's whims. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman. And now I would like to yield 2.5 minutes to the gentle lady from Massachusetts, Ms. Presley.
Thank you, Congresswoman Ramirez. Appreciate your leadership. It's so important that we do not allow the hostile acts of this administration to be normalized. We have to condemn them, resist and reject them at every turn. Mr. Speaker, I rise today on behalf of the targeted and marginalized, on behalf of our immigrant siblings who have had their bodies assaulted, who have had their lives disrupted, who have had their families separated, who have had their humanity erased and their dignity denied. Men, women, and children who have been ripped from our communities, thrown into cold cells, and shipped off to countries many have never known. The Trump administration would have you believe that they are pursuing hardened criminals. Yet according to ICE's own data, 85% of the people detained in Massachusetts, my home state, have no criminal record. Rogue, masked federal agents are violating people's civil rights, glorified bullies masquerading as public servants. They terrorize our communities in the name of so-called law and order, while detaining and deporting our neighbors without due process. That hypocrisy is not coincidence. It is a deliberate, resounding message from an administration that believes following the Constitution is a mere suggestion. My office has documented hundreds of cases marked by excessive force, racial profiling, and the unlawful arrest of legal residents. Just last month, rogue federal agents descended on the Alston neighborhood in the Massachusetts 7th, a diverse community that is home to small businesses and music venues that are welcoming to all. These federal agents targeted a local car wash to harass and abduct hardworking community members. Among them were 5 women who were never afforded the chance to show their work permits, and a 67-year-old man who was disappeared for 3 days without access to his medication. Families waited in anguish to hear from their loved ones, many of whom reported not having enough to eat and being unable to shower. Cruel, callous, inhumane, and unlawful. But in these trying times, I am not defeated. I am fortified and resolved to fight back. The only way to beat a dictator is with defiance. Together we will protect our communities, defend our immigrant neighbors and their families. I yield back to Congresswoman Ramirez.
Thank you, Congresswoman. As you can hear from my colleagues here, we are living the reality of this nightmare across the country, and that is why we're here to push back. I want to yield 2.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Clark.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ramirez. I appreciate your leadership in this moment. Mr. Speaker, I rise on this day in opposition to the vicious, violent, unconstitutional, and illegal war Donald Trump and his administration continue to wage against our immigrant neighbors. On the President's orders, the Department of Homeland Security and its agents of hatred have taken unprecedented and unthinkable and abusive control over the lives of immigrant Americans. His goon squad has broken up families, torn communities apart, and committed atrocities equal only to the worst sins in the history of our nation, and with extra sins to spare. Refugees, asylum seekers, and countless other people desperately seeking any semblance of safety beyond our shores have only found more pain here in the land of the free and the home of the brave. Even our neighbors with citizenship have been targeted in this campaign of hatred. In fact, more than 170 U.S. citizens have already been wrongfully detained under this administration, some held for days, many subjected to brutality just for brutality's sake. It pains me to know and to say that 4 of these citizens were arrested during ICE's crackdown in New York City's Canal Street. It is disgusting, unconstitutional, and uncivilized. No matter how desperately he wishes it weren't, I have news for the President. New York City will always be a sanctuary to the oppressed and the powerless, as will other communities like ours across this nation. Our doors will always be open to those seeking refuge and safety, no matter how deeply they try to dehumanize immigrant Americans. The people of this country know full well where the inhumanity lies. The President and his masked agents of violence and hatred have seen to that. So let me say to Congresswoman Delia Ramirez, thank you so much for your leadership, for your truth-telling, for your standing up, and to all of my colleagues of the Progressive Caucus. We are on the right side of history, and this history that we are experiencing right now, this era, will go down in infamy. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you for all of your leadership. I'd like to now yield 2.5 minutes to the gentle lady from Hawaii, Ms. Takuda.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, 80 years ago, over 120,000 Japanese individuals were stripped of their rights and forced into barbed wire camps because of the way they looked and the language they spoke. My great-grandfather, my Gigi, was one of them. He was taken from his home on Maui and imprisoned, not for anything that he had done, but for who he was. We said then, never again. Yet here we are today. Now the very sites where Japanese American families were incarcerated have been reopened. Fort Bliss, a World War II internment camp, is now the nation's largest immigrant detention center. To add insult to injury, the Trump administration is using the same law, the Alien Enemies Act, that was once used to imprison Japanese Americans to detain and fast-track deportations with zero due process rights. And while this administration insists it is targeting dangerous criminals, we know that more than 73% of those in ICE custody have no criminal convictions at all. This administration is also intentionally dismantling legal pathways and stripping people of lawful status so they can be deported, just as we saw on Kauai recently, where a raid that swept up 44 people ended with 6 Venezuelan men who were legally here seeking asylum, self-deporting after the administration revoked temporary protected status for their country. To anyone who thinks this could never happen to me, consider this. 2/3 of the Japanese imprisoned in camps were American citizens. Their children, like my grandfather, serving in the United States military in defense of a country who saw them as the enemy. Today, American citizens are also being rounded up once again, stopped and detained simply for the way they look, by officers who face no accountability. United States military veterans picked up, detained, deported. What we are witnessing is a slow, methodical erosion of citizens' rights and a cold indifference towards treating entire communities as national security threats. We are in the midst of history in the making, and history has already shown us the dangers of what this country can do when given unchecked, unfettered immigration authorities. So I ask my colleagues on all sides of the aisle, how much are we willing to tolerate before we say enough is enough? 80 years later, this nation still reflects with shame at what it did to our Japanese American families. We apologize, we vowed to learn, we vowed to do better, and we have failed. Nidoto nai, my colleagues, nidoto nai. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Enough is enough. And to talk more about how enough is enough, I would like to yield 2.5 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Vargas.
I thank the gentlewoman, and enough is enough. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to join my colleagues in sounding the alarm of Trump's out-of-control immigration crackdown. Since January, Trump has unleashed a mass deportation agenda and his indiscriminate immigration enforcement that has pushed past all moral and legal boundaries. In Chicago, federal immigration agents tear-gassed kids and fired pepper balls at a pastor. In Charlotte, ICE agents descended on the grounds by a church and forced terrified congregants to flee into the woods outside. And at home in San Diego, we had a horrific incident where federal agents stormed into a local restaurant frequented by families. They handcuffed all the employees, and they flashbanged grenades outside. There are stories like this from communities all across the country that this administration has done, and we heard them today. Stories of Trump's immigration agents causing fear and chaos. Stories of violent raids turning quiet neighborhoods into places that feel more like war zones. Trump's out-of-control immigration enforcement is terrorizing our communities and putting our civil liberties under threat. Undocumented immigrants are not the only ones affected. It is also harming U.S. citizens, people with legal status, and those who have been here for decades contributing to our country. We cannot turn away. We cannot be silent. We must continue to fight against these abuses. Communities deserve policies that protect families, protect peace and safety, and uphold rights. And I want to thank the Catholic Church. I want to thank the bishops for their courageous, unwavering support for the immigrant community in our country. And I ask all other religions and leaders of faith to come forward. Why are you silent in this shameful moment? We should hear your voices as it's commanded in Leviticus very clearly. Leviticus 19, chapter 19, verses 33 and 34. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat him. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Leviticus. Please come forward. Don't be silent. And with that, I yield back to the gentlelady.
Thank you, Congressman. May those that quote Scripture remember what the Scripture says. I would like to now yield 2 minutes to the gentle lady from Arizona, Ms. Grijalva.
Thank you, Representative Ramirez. Since the beginning of his second term, Donald Trump has directed the enforcement machine that is not only cruel but unconstitutional, targeting longtime residents, law-abiding visa holders, U.S. citizens, and even veterans who have fought for this country. In border communities like the one I represent in Arizona's 7th Congressional District, we see the impact of these abuses every single day. We have seen Border Patrol waiting outside of hospitals, literally arresting women after they've given birth. No due process, no regard for human rights. Last week, we saw a disturbing example near the ranching community of Arivaca. Humanitarian volunteers with No More Deaths reported that Border Patrol agents forced their way into their desert aid station known as Bird Camp without a warrant and arrested 3 migrants who were resting inside a trailer. Volunteers told agents they could not enter without a warrant. Agents left, then returned, claiming that they were in hot pursuit, even though there was no chase, no threat, no legal justification that would allow entering a protected structure. This camp has existed for decades to keep people from dying in the desert. More than 4,400 men, women, and children have died crossing the border in Arizona since 2000. The camp has been raided before, but previously with a warrant. What happened on November 23rd was different. It was lawless, intentional, and part of a broader pattern of unchecked enforcement that treats border communities as if the Constitution does not apply. Let me say this clearly. The Fourth Amendment does not disappear in southern Arizona. Due process does not disappear because someone is a migrant, and humanitarian aid is not a crime. Thank you, and I yield back to Mr. Representative Ramirez.
Thank you, Congresswoman Grijalva. And now I'd like to also yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Torres.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak out against the narrative being promoted about immigrants, portraying them as rapists, drug dealers, and murderers. These claims are nothing more than a self-reflection of our country's leaders who promise to protect Americans and enforce the law, yet whose actions have violated basic human rights, the Constitution, and the rule of law, and are now costing our country economically. Under these policies, DHS is targeting people because of the color of their skin, the language they speak, and where they come from. Families are being separated, children are traumatized, and communities live in fear. These actions are weakening our labor force, shrinking our tax base, and threatening industries that rely on stable workforce. Members of Congress should not be targeted with CS gas, shoved, or have false charges filed against them simply for doing their jobs. Oversight. Citizens should not be shot at simply for raising concerns about the safety of children in the presence of armed men in their neighborhoods. This approach doesn't make us safer. It disrupts local economies, increases costs for taxpayers, and undermines the workforce that keeps our country running. Every day, these policies continue. Businesses lose workers, consumers lose purchasing power, and taxpayers pay for the unnecessary enforcement. We need transparency, fair treatment, and laws that reflect the reality, not fear or political theater. Let me remind this chamber, undocumented immigrants, the same people being targeted, contributed $96.7 billion in federal, state, and local taxes in 2022, including $25.7 billion into Social Security benefits they will never receive, $6.4 billion into Medicare, $1.8 billion into unemployment insurance. If some members don't care about the human cost, consider the financial one. Removing these workers weakens our economy and raises costs for everyone. Protecting them protects our bottom line. Thank you, and I yield back to Representative Ramirez.
Thank you, Congresswoman. May we remember, I think you said $96.7 billion is what undocumented immigrants give in tax revenue every single year. I'd like to now close the speakers for the day with yielding to the gentlewoman from Arizona, Ms. Ansari, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Congresswoman Ramirez, for your leadership. Mr. Speaker, The Trump regime's mass deportation agenda is not about public safety. It is part of a much bigger story of corruption, cruelty, and abuse of power that defines Trump's America. Earlier this year, Congress authorized a massive slush fund under Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill, pouring more than $170 billion of taxpayer money into enforcement and detention center expansion without any sort of meaningful oversight. And at the heart of this system sits a vast network of privatized detention facilities run by private prison corporations like CoreCivic and Geo Group, whose bottom lines depend on filling these beds. These companies are awarded government contracts worth billions of dollars, yet their facilities are notorious for cutting corners on health care, on food, and safety in order to maximize shareholder profits. I have seen this firsthand at the Eloy Detention Center in Arizona, run by CoreCivic. I've talked to dozens of women who have been detained there. They've shared with me their testimonies about lack of clean drinking water, lack of air conditioning during Arizona's extreme heat, racist, inhumane treatment, and of course, my constituent, Yadi, who is a green card holder who has leukemia, has been detained there and refused access to an oncologist for 6 months until direct outreach from our office and the community's input as well. And this is all, again, all about shareholder profit. CoreCivic, for example, had a revenue of $530 million during the second quarter of this year alone, an almost 10% increase from 2024. Meanwhile, Geo Group's chairman said Republicans' new slush fund for ICE would provide, quote, unprecedented growth opportunities. CoreCivic CEO Damon Hinninger stated in shareholder calls that this is a, quote, pivotal moment, and that business is perfectly aligned with demands of this moment. That is disgusting. Donald Trump's cruelty against immigrants has transformed human misery into both a political spectacle and a business model. The more people that are detained, the more money private corporations make, and the more campaign contributions and political power flow directly back to Donald Trump and those who fund this system. This is Trump's corruption machine, turning our immigration system into a play-to-pay racket for his donors. Meanwhile, families across the country are paying the price. Parents are torn from their children, leaving households and communities economically devastated. Taxpayers in this country are footing the bill for a system not designed to keep us safe, but to funnel money into the pockets of a powerful few. It does not have to be this way. We can invest in alternatives to detention centers that are proven to be more humane and effective. We can end blank checks for ICE and stop the privatization of immigration detention centers once and for all. And we can finally reject the lie that Trumpian cruelty is security, because in America, our safety should never come second to a billion-dollar corporation's profit. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Look, in the last minute or two left, I want to say this. The bottom line is this. What is happening today in our communities is not an accident. It's not new. DHS is not rogue. From its establishment, DHS has always been empowered to violate our rights under the pretense of securing our safety. It is why they wear masks, why they refuse to wear badges, why they won't identify themselves, and why they resist oversight and accountability. They were designed to operate in a shadow and secrecy because they are waging a war against the American people. You may not know it because they just haven't come for you yet. But Trump's authoritarian fascist tendencies, his power grabs, his overreach, and his willingness to shamelessly use DHS as its own terror force is only making visible what so many communities have already known to be true. DHS is a democratic liability and a tool for authoritarian control. Nothing that DHS is doing is making us any safer, and Americans, frankly, they're done. We see through the lies. We cannot assure our security by sacrificing our humanity, our dignity, or our liberty. We have seen what DHS can do with its unlimited resources and unchecked power, and we say enough. DHS has to be held accountable. So today, as you've heard the stories from my colleagues of Trump's immigration enforcement overreach, I want to encourage you to remember history and context. We brought DHS into this world less than 25 years ago we can build a world without it as well. I want to thank my colleagues who joined today's special order on Trump's immigration overreach. We understand that true security is built by investing in people, and as members of Congress, we must actively build that world through policies that defend and expand our rights and civil liberties, not crush them. That is the work we must do, and we must resist the fear that would tell us that we must surrender our rights and forfeit our values in order to protect the little we have when we deserve so much more. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Thank you. I want to thank the good ladies for their spirited comments and remind members to refrain from engaging in personalities towards the President and to direct the remarks to the Chair. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2025, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. Let's begin with, I'm going to yield to Chairwoman Fox as much time as she may consume, and then we'll have some fun with math.
I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Schweikert, for yielding me time. Mr. Speaker, this past weekend, I had the wonderful opportunity to stop in at Top of the Mountain Farm in Ashe County and support a local small business selling Christmas trees and wreaths. Becky and Bill Fairchild, the owners of this Christmas tree farm, were very welcoming, and I was so fortunate to meet their three daughters, Bailey, Brooke, and Blair, along with other members of the family during my visit. Western North Carolina, for many years, has produced impeccable Christmas trees that have been featured at the White House and are the most beautifully grown anywhere. The Fraser fir, the true Cadillac of Christmas trees, is what our area is known for producing. Christmas tree farms play such an important role in the economy of North Carolina, and I want to highlight them, especially during the Christmas season. The beautiful tree that I picked up that day is now in my living room, and I'll be enjoying it until January. Thank you to the Fairchild family for such an enjoyable visit and for helping me pick out a tree of my own. I look forward to stopping in again to see all of you in the future. May God continue to bless you, and may He bless our country with a very happy and joyous Christmas season. I yield back to the gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox. All right. And I apologize, but the good news for the team here, I'm not going to use the rest of the hour, so I promise we're not going to go that long. And that's the only happy part of this I have for you, because I thought I'd actually use this week, I would come and show you all the creative ideas we have to take on debt and deficit and